Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this week's episode of Saved You a Seat. We apologize for our technical difficulties we had on Tuesday and really appreciate the fact that you guys were able to rearrange your schedules and join us today. Sadly, GoToWebinar had some audio issues. We don't want to tempt fate, so we are actually not going to do webcams today. We're just going to do audio. We have Jason Nadeau, which is the Chief Digital Officer at F&F with us today. So we have kind of the expert in the field talking about remote online notarization and RIN and e-recording. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason here in a second, but I just wanted to remind everybody, you can certainly type in your questions as you have in the past, and I'll kind of monitor them. And if I can put them in when he's talking about a topic, great. If not, we are going to allow some time at the end. And as always, we will provide a recap and send an email out to everybody. We will include the Q&A and also a link to this recording. So if you feel that your question didn't get answered, please don't worry. We will include it in the Q&A if you send it in. So it's on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Likely it says questions and you can type in there. Also, feel free at any time to email me directly like we have in the past. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason and let him get talking. Thank you, Jason.
Great, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate you having me on as a guest. We're going to try and keep it kind of casual today, and I'm not going to talk at you for a full hour. My goal is to share a bit of information out there about RON and then field any questions that you have. So feel free to throw them in as we go, and I will try and address as many of them as possible. What I want to do today is really kind of take you through a little bit of, I'm not going to take you through what is RON. I'm assuming everybody knows what RON is, but I will talk a little bit about RON. I'll talk about some of the RIN or the AVN or Avon closings that are out there, talk to you a little bit about kind of the key components behind RON, and then share with you what we're seeing going on in the marketplace, what's been going on from a regulatory point of view, what's been going on with Fannie and Freddie, what are we seeing at the federal level from a legislation standpoint, and then what's actually happening. What are we seeing in terms of transactional volume? What are we seeing on the ground at Fidelity, both with our agents and with our operations? So let's go ahead and talk first a little bit kind of the difference between the two. So we've talked about RON. I think everybody knows what RON is, but I think one of the things that's really important to think about when you think about RON versus say a RIN or an AVN closing is RON involves digitally signing the document. So at the end of the day, somebody is click signing, they are electronically signing those documents, and then they are digitally notarizing these documents. We can talk about all the things that it has like KVA and credential analysis, and most of you know that, but this is not a FaceTime, this is not a Zoom, this is not a GoToMeeting type scenario. This is you're using a RON software package, and people are digitally or electronically signing the documents. From our standpoint at Fidelity, this is our preferred method versus doing RIN or AVN. We talk about remote in-person notarization. These are all the result of various temporary orders. And the important word there is temporary. The versions are temporary executive orders. And one thing to keep in mind that I had to do as I was thinking about how this affected us as these orders came out is I thought, well, how's this going to affect title? How's this going to affect what we're going to doing? And there's lots of challenges with how these work in our space. Well, of course, that's what we thought about. But a little bit of background. The actual reason why these temporary executive orders exist to allow you to watch somebody notarize a document over a webcam or over Zoom or something, and then ship that paper document to the notary to stamp and sign and go away is because we knew that there were people who were under treatment for COVID, people who were infectious, people who may be fighting for their lives that had not got their affairs in order. They had not executed the documents they needed to take care of their family and to take care of any sort of post-transition issues, but yet we didn't want to be sending notaries into ICUs to sign documents and such. So these temporary executive orders were really put in play for end-of-life document execution and not really for real estate, even though the world does revolve around us in the title business. One of the main challenges, and I'm not going to talk too much about RIN, but one of the main challenges that we do struggle with in the RIN scenario for you to think about if you are doing them is really what we consider sort of the custodian of these documents, which is that, as you know, the buyer, the signer, is getting documents either shipped to them or they're asked to print them out. They sign them over video and then they ship them to the notary. One of the challenges is sort of the custody of those documents, meaning once the webcam is turned off, you run the risk that that signer could replace a page out with different text, that signer could do a completely different set of documents and ship it back to that notary. So that notary is required to really kind of go through every document line by line against an original and make sure that what is being notarized actually was being sent to them. So we do still run into some issues around that, and as a result, I don't think that we're going to be looking at sort of RIN being a long-term solution for our industry at all, due to a number of these custody issues and security issues. What we are seeing a lot of in the marketplace these days, and as a result of COVID, it has just exploded, is a hybrid RON closing. And what we mean by that is that we are going through the RON process. They are electronically signing documents, they are electronically notarizing documents, but the note, when the lender's not ready for the e-note and they've not implemented their e-note infrastructure, the notes may be shipped to the consumer directly to sign and ship back. In some instances, the lenders are FedExing it to that borrower to sign and send back. In other instances, it's coming to the title company, and the title company is sending it to them to sign and send back. So in other words, you've sort of got a RON transaction for everything but the note, and that the note is in fact still wet signed. Now, I will tell you that from our seat here at Fidelity and in my role in talking to a lot of lenders in the marketplace, that there is a tremendous move afoot to move to digital transactions and to move to electronic notes as a result of the COVID crisis. Obviously, the stay-at-home orders pushed it really hard. Those are all lifting around the country, but we know that this is going to be a long battle against this virus, and we may go back into stay-at-home orders. So what a number of these lenders are saying, and what I'm hearing from them, is that now they're seeing COVID as a disaster recovery issue, as a business continuity issue, as we've all seen, and now their ability to get documents signed with social distancing or electronically is no longer just a nice customer service feature. It is in fact a business continuity issue, and that is bringing it up definitely to the surface priority for a lot of the customers that we're working with. So let's just talk real quickly. Most of you know this, but I want to kind of do a little bit of a refresher for everybody. What are the components of a RON transaction? And this is important because as I put these all together, I'm then going to talk to you about how you want to operate your business and how you want to operate or select technology upon which you're going to operate. So the first thing we know about is electronic signatures and digital signatures. So in order for it to be a RON transaction, you need to sign electronically. We're all familiar with this. We've all been using electronic signatures for a very, very long time in our business. In fact, it's been around 20 years now. The new thing that comes along when you look at a RON transaction is the notary also digitally signs. A little bit of a difference. The buyer and seller actually electronically sign, meaning they click I agree, or they put a little scribble that looks like their name on the document. That's their electronic signature. The notary, however, digitally signs the document. What does that mean? It means that the notary has gone to an independent certificate authority like Identitrust, like DigiCert, and they have purchased a digital certificate, and they take that digital certificate and they load it on a thumb drive or they load it on their computer. And when they sign the documents as the notary, they are digitally signed using that private key that they acquired from this third-party company. And that is what creates the tamper seal on the document. So the notary digitally signs and the notary tamper seals that document. I say on here, no e-sign software does this today except for RON systems. And that's not meant to be a damning statement in any way. That's just simply me sharing with you all that RON is not as simple as I'm going to take that e-sign tool that I've been using to sign some disclosures and sign some of my title documents, jump on Zoom, and between Zoom and my e-sign tool, I have a RON solution. No, you have to have a PKI certified digital certificate program that tamper seals that document with that issued certificate from a third party that is signing that document and sealing it. And that's unique to the way you handle RON solutions. So think about that when you're thinking about other systems. The other thing that's really important part of RON is credential analysis, knowledge-based authentication. Said better, how do we know the person signing is really the person signing? There's lots of different ways this can be done. Most of the states have some level of legislation that says you have to use a third-party software to scan IDs, to look for holograms, and to look for various security features built into the ID itself. And then the signer needs to go through a knowledge-based authentication. They have to ask some questions, answer some questions about themselves, generally based upon their public and records and credit scores and such. This is how we know the person that is signing into the system and sitting in front of you on the other side of that webcam is in fact who they are representing themselves to be. Audit trail and e-sign enforceability, some of these things are pretty important. Now, an audit trail as far as who was signing the documents and such, that's been around a long time. If you've done any kind of e-signatures, you'll know that as part of an e-signature, program, it tracks who logged in, who signed it, what IP address you signed it for, and such. So that is still a part of RON. What RON brings to the table is that transaction now needs to be recorded on video. That video feed watching the person sign those documents, watching them hold up their ID, watching them go through the knowledge-based authentication pieces, those need to be done on video. And it is a requirement that in doing it on video, that is a continuous and synchronous audio and video feed and has to be of good clarity. That just makes sense. The reason that's important, and we'll talk about it a little bit more going forward, is this requires you have pretty good bandwidth, and it requires you have a pretty good camera and a pretty good laptop. So in other words, if you have really, really weak internet, you have intermittent internet, you have a 15-year-old laptop and a lousy camera that's first generation, you're going to struggle as a consumer to do a RON transaction because, frankly, they're going to be dropping connection all the time. It's going to be grainy. It's going to be hard to see who they really are. The need for a continuous, high quality or high definition video recordation has been a hurdle for us in the RON space. A lot of customers do not have the greatest internet access, or, like I am here sitting at home today with a stay-at-home order working. I may be on here with you, and if all of a sudden my sound cuts out or things slow down, it's because somebody just fired up Fortnite and Netflix at the same time in my house. So these are some of the challenges that we're starting to see out there, but it's important to know that the reason for it is it is actually part of the law. It is part of the auditability of the transaction. We talked about tamper sealing already. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is important. And what the tamper seal at the end of the day does is it allows us as the title insurer, it allows the lender, it allows the secondary market, and then ultimately will end up allowing the courts, if need be, to take a PDF file, open that PDF file up, look at that audit log, identify who signed it, and then ultimately look at the digital certificate that was issued to that notary and confirm with whoever issued that digital certificate that that RON notary really is who they say they are, and that they tamper sealed the document, and that the document was not altered or changed in any way since the notary sealed that document. And these are the things, we're new to RON. We haven't had a RON court case challenge yet. We haven't gone through a RON closed bankruptcy or a RON closed foreclosure. And hopefully we recover from an economic point of view in this country soon enough that we aren't going to be seeing a lot of those coming up. But this is going to be a really important part of when we get down the road. Inevitably, some of these transactions do end up in the courts. How well these systems handle the tamper sealing, how well they handle the digital certificates, and how well they handle authentication and identification of the consumer at the end of the day are going to be the things that we're arguing about when we argue in court about enforceability of those documents. So we, as an underwriter, when we look at systems and we determine whether we want to use systems or we want our agents to use the systems, those are kind of our three most important points that we're looking at, is to make sure that these documents being created are very well thought through from a security and infrastructure standpoint, and that they stand alone separate of that RON system down the road from an enforceability standpoint. Record storage. This is a new area for all of us. And I'll tell you that we've had to change things in Fidelity land a bit around this, which is that, one, the notary has to maintain a notary journal. That's normal. Notaries have always had to maintain journals. Now that they're online and electronic, it's actually easier for them because they're not having to break out the book and write it all down and everything. What is new is they are required to keep a copy of the audio video recording for some period of time. title underwriters, I don't know about all title underwriters, I can't speak to anybody else's policies, but I do know that Fidelity's policy across all of our underwriters for our directs and for our agents, we do require that that video be stored, and that video be stored for the life of the transaction, for the life of the policy, if you will. Most lenders are requiring a copy of that video for the life of the transaction. We're going to talk about Fannie and Freddie guidelines that came out a month or so ago. They require keeping a video of that transaction. Why is this important? Well, number one, it's very important to think about how you're going to store and secure that video. That video has all of the customer's documents on it. It has their credit information. It has the pictures of their driver's license on it. It has all of their private data. So it's a very important file to keep access to and secure. The second thing is they can be quite large. We've done a number of them now, and looking at the last 1,000 or so RON transactions that we did here over the last month or so, we went back and surveyed it, and the average file is running about 300 megs. We have a couple that are several gig because the transaction took several hours. So these documents can be quite large. We need to pass them around and we need to store them. So something to think about that's important. It's not cheap to be handling all of these videos and all these transactions. Last thing to talk about as far as components, actually second to last thing, looking at my slide deck here, location, location, location. I get more questions about location than anything else, and I suspect we'll get some today. It's interesting when we talk about which party in the transaction does the location matter. Is it really about where the notary is? Is it about where the property is? Is it where the signer is? So in other words, if you've got a property in Texas where I happen to be today, do I need a Texas notary? Do I need to use a Texas notary on a notary property, or can I use a Washington State notary on a Texas property? If I'm a resident of Florida buying property in Texas, can I use a Washington notary? Do I have to use a Florida notary? Or maybe it needs to be a Texas notary. This gets a little confusing, and these are the questions that we get a lot. Some of it is going to be dependent upon your underwriter's guidelines, but as a general rule, the safest bet is to ensure that the property is residing in a state where there is a RON law. The next highest, safest plan is to make sure you're using a notary for that state. So the property is in Texas. Does Texas have a RON law? It does. Should I use a Texas notary? Yes, that would be great. Now, does the buyer or the seller, when they sign those documents, have to be sitting in the state of Texas? Our opinion at Fidelity is they don't. If they happen to be sitting in Florida, or they're on vacation, or they were stuck out of the country because of COVID, we're okay with that as long as the property and the notary are at the same location. Other underwriters have different opinions on that. We also do allow, in some instances, and I know other underwriters do also, we do allow a RON notary from another state with a RON law to perform a transaction on a property as long as it is what we call RON to RON. So if both states have RON laws, we do support that. These rules change all the time. So just because I'm saying that's the case today, our underwriting guidelines might change again tomorrow. But it is important to understand that what we have generally found is the most important thing to think about when you're thinking about location is think about, where's that property located? Where is the notary going to be? And then the buyers and sellers are residents of what? We don't generally concern ourselves with where they actually are at the moment of signing as much as we look at those particular parts of the transaction when we're looking at deciding what location comes into play. Last thing is county recorder. You all hear about this all the time. Does the county recorder accept this? I wish, and I know some people are working on it, but I wish there was a master file somewhere that we could all go to, and we knew for a fact that county recorders would certify to some third-party entity, ALTA or somebody else, and say, we absolutely will take RON notarized documents here in our county, and we could have a master list for the whole industry. That doesn't exist. There are some people working on it, so hopefully we will get it, but it doesn't exist today. And the hard thing is that it's a little bit of a nuanced conversation you have to go have with your county recorder, because not only do you have to find out whether or not they will accept RON transactions, it goes back to location, location, location. What I mean by that is I've had conversations with county recorders where I've asked them if they accept RON documents in their county. Let's say in Texas again, we'll pick on Texas. And they will say, we absolutely will, as long as it's with a Texas notary. And we might say to them, but we're okay with a Florida notary notarizing a document in Texas because we believe that you've got interstate recognition from RON to RON. I've spoken with county recorders who have said they don't believe that they only believe that it's acceptable to record a document if it was a notary from that state. Other county recorders don't care at all. So it is definitely incumbent upon you to take a look at the counties that you are operating in and go have conversations with your county recorders. Some of the county recorders are now starting to put blanket statements out on their websites about accepting RON documents, which is great, but it is going to be very important that you have that conversation. And I honestly recommend you have that conversation a couple times with them. Have that conversation with them up front before you do it, and then check again with them in 90 days and check again with them again 90 days from now, because we have seen county recorders change position when something's been challenged. So I do think that that is something that, at least until we have a lot more adoption with your county recorders, that you continue to have a dialogue with them on it. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is kind of the last piece I'm going to talk about RON itself. What really happens in a RON transaction? Well, the steps are pretty straightforward. We verify the ID of the constituent coming in to sign. One thing that's important to understand is the point of verifying their ID is that that ID needs to be verified as close to, or if not completely, a part of their signing into sign. The reason I say that is, you think about the same kind of process you would do if you're sitting at the table and somebody brought their ID to you. You would want the person who's going to be signing to sit down in front of you at the table, nowadays 6 feet away, but sit down in front of you at the table, and to show you their ID, and for you to be able to look at them right before you give them the documents and say, yep, that's Leslie. What you wouldn't want to do is you wouldn't want Leslie to come in and sit down and say, hi, I'm Leslie Wyatt. Somebody over there verified my ID, I'm fine. And the reason I say that is, again, back to what I talked about, trying to assemble your own RON system and some of the challenges with doing that. If you're taking an e-sign solution, you're taking a video solution, and then you're taking some ID solution out there, they all need to be embedded together, because you don't want to have the verification of the ID so disconnected from the process that I could be sitting here and I could have some third party jump in with their ID and they're answering the questions on my behalf. And so when I come into closing, I'm not really the person you thought I was, because I had a whole army of people sitting around me researching information on the internet, putting together fake IDs and such. You want to have it be sort of part of the process, just like it would if it was at the closing table with you. You are going to need to get everybody's consent to do RON transactions. Very important part of the e-sign legislation is that the person going in, before they actually sign any documents, they actually have to sign a document saying, I agree to sign documents. Then, as we talked about, they review and sign the documents, notary signs and tamper seals, and then the notary delivers the documents or the video to escrow. The delivery of the video to escrow is an important part. We've received some pushback from some of the notaries on this that have said, well, I'm supposed to keep the video. In almost all cases, the escrow or the closing or the title office, depending upon your terminology, is going to have to receive a copy of that video, if for no other purpose than to pass it along to the lender. Again, as an underwriter, we require they keep it. I suspect other underwriters do the same. So it is going to be an important part of the process that that notary is getting that video to escrow. And these are large videos, so make sure you've got good bandwidth, make sure you've got a good process, make sure they're secure. These are not going to be things that you're just going to be emailing around, not only because of the security, but also obviously because of the size. And then the last thing, I think we've kind of hit on all these things, but the important thing to think about, anytime I think about e-closing, I think about breaking the documents apart. And I think to myself, how are we going to do this based upon the pieces of the transaction? Everybody at this juncture probably has heard about the note and the e-note and the problems around it. That's 100% on the lender. As a title company, we cannot solve an e-note solution for a lender. We can't tell the lender, hey, I've got this for you. They have got to implement an e-note on their end. They're going to have to work with their doc prep systems to prepare the special e-note document. They're going to need to have an e-vaulting system. They're going to need to work with their investors and their servicers to make sure that they can receive sell, and service an e-note. From our point of view, all we know is the lender's got to figure out how to get the note signed. Recorded documents. As we know, these documents, you got to make sure your county recorder is going to take them. You got to be in a county with e-recording, and you got to make sure the county will accept RON documents. There are exceptions in some instances where you have the ability to paper out, and you may be able to paper out that RON document in a non-e-recording county, but those are definitely the exception, not the rule. The notarized documents. The real rule around the notarized document is make sure your lender and your underwriter are okay with those documents being done via RON, and that you've got lender and underwriter approval to do those documents. And then the last is all of the other documents. I say disclosures and others because it's nicer than saying junk documents. But we have lots of other documents that we have at the closing table. We're very good at creating documents in this industry. All states, all counties permit them. They don't need to be recorded. They don't need to be notarized. Really, the only one you need to check with is the lender. There are some lenders out there, believe it or not, who still do not allow e-signatures on their disclosures and other types of documents. So at the end of the day, those sets of documents, you need to take a look at the lenders. All right, so let's change gears here a little bit, and let's talk a bit about what we've been seeing for adoption. So here's a map, compliments of ALTA, that I borrowed from their website. You can see the link there if you want to borrow it to keep up to date. This was as of May 11th. And you see in there everything that is green. These are the states that have permanent RON legislation that is in play. We're up to 24 states. A number of the other states do have temporary orders. Those temporary orders have some version of RIN or RON hybrid in them. They are temporary orders. Every state is different, but I do believe, and this is just Jason's point of view, but I do believe that as we move into the summer months, as the number of people who are in intensive care needing to sign end-of-life documents, and as we start figuring out how to operate more in our businesses with masks and gloves and plastic and social distancing and such, I do think those temporary orders will expire. That being said, I do also believe that going into the next legislative cycle, there are a number of states who are going to be pushing RON to the forefront and getting them passed. So I don't have a good number to handicap against, but if I had to guess, I would say that next year, we're probably going to add another 5 to 8 states to this, where we will be checking off them as RON enabled. We are going to be getting very close, I think, by this time next year, to having well over 60 to 70% of the transactions in the country will be RON enabled. And I do think that as we start getting there, we're going to start seeing it become more the norm and more a part of our service offering. Do I think all transactions are going to go RON? I don't. Do I think that it is going to be another part of our offering? I do. And for those of you who are old like myself and have been around the transaction space here in the real estate world for a long time, I think RON's going to kind of go the way mobile notary did, which is that we did it on occasion. We started in unique situations only when people were sick or didn't have a car. Then it started becoming convenience. Then it started becoming normal to close at Starbucks. I think we're going to see the same sort of thing. It'll start becoming more and more a part of our service offering, but it won't be for everyone and it won't be for all transactions. Some of you may have heard there's some great work done by a number of trade partners led by ALTA. Very proud of our association, our trade association, and the American Land Title Association, and their leadership around this. They took up the banner around RON at a federal level, and they rallied support from a number of different entities, from the National Association of Realtors, the American Bankers Association, the National Home Builder Association, and the Mortgage Bankers Association. And we put together, as an industry, a federal remote online notarization bill that was introduced to the House and Senate. It was originally done early on, and the hope was that we could get it attached to one of the emergency funding measures. And there was great promise and great momentum around it. As we have seen, we got one emergency measure out, and then the government happened, and now we've got lots of arguments going on between the House and the Senate and such about what to do as far as a second relief bill. And so in that time frame, we have worked with ALTA and they've worked with these groups, and we do have a bit of a change of the bill. So it was originally going to be a sort of a high-level RON bill to provide sort of high-level federal standards that allow states to do whatever they wanted in between. We've since revised that, and now instead of a national RON bill, what we have is we have a bill that we've got with them that looks like it's designed to provide certainty for interstate recognition of RON, so that we feel comfortable that if a state doesn't have a RON law in place, you can use a notary from a state that does, and we have some level of federal comfort that there will be interstate recognition of that notarial act. It would be, looks like it would be something that would sunset. So in other words, as long as we're still under a national emergency order, plus 6 months. I do say that it's looking less and less likely to get accomplished. That is not the opinion of the ALTA, and that is not the opinion of the government affairs people. They may agree with me. That is Jason's opinion, based upon how effective I think our government has been on getting other things done now post the initial bill. I feel like a lot of legislation like this may get bottlenecked a bit behind it. But want to let you know that it's out there and that they are working for us on it. And so far, I've been doing some outstanding work with it. Some of you may have heard, and if you haven't, this was rather groundbreaking for RON and for digital closings or digital mortgages overall, which is that Fannie and Freddie put out guidance on it. So if those of you are familiar or have been working in the digital closing and digital mortgage space for a while now, know that Fannie and Freddie have been buying e-mortgages, and they were accepting RON transactions. They were buying e-notes, but they were doing so under a specialized program that the lender needed to sign up for, and the lender needed to sort of opt into and then be accepted in from Fannie or Freddie, and that required some work on the lender's part. Fannie and Freddie on the 23rd, they issued bulletins. They're very similar bulletins. In fact, there was a guidance from the FHFA, which is their oversight entity, to both of them, and they issued their own bulletins, very, very similar to one another, that basically stated two things that are important. Number one, any lender in good standing with them can sell them e-mortgages, can sell them e-notes. They don't need to be part of the e-mortgage program. So there was no need to apply, get qualified, sign up, all of that. They simply could just start selling them e-mortgages if they wanted to. And then the second was that they were okay with buying transactions where RON was used on it, as long as the RON transaction was insured by an underwriter and that there was no exception on the title policy taking exception to anything about RON. So in other words, as long as it was insured, clear title on the RON transaction, they were taking it. They did call out for states, as you can see on the screen there, and said they would not buy RON loans from those states. One of you may put a question out later during this webinar about why those 4 states. I do not know. We have asked, we don't know. We have our theories, but our theories have lots of holes in them. So at this juncture, we're not exactly sure why those states have been excluded at this juncture. I've got it all on here. I've listed a bunch of bullet points on here from their guidelines. I'm not going to go through them all with you. I know that we're going to probably be providing a copy of the deck, which is what I put in there, but I am going to talk about the ones in red. So if you remember, I talked about the video. I harped on it a bunch. This comes from, in addition to underwriter guidelines and notarial guidelines, this comes from FHFA and the GSEs, that the recording of the notarial ceremony needs to be recorded by, or needs to be kept for applicable law, or at minimum for 7 years. So this means that the lender has to keep a copy of the video also. Fannie and Freddie are requiring that of them if they're going to sell them that loan, which is why the lender requirement has come about. The other thing that they have in there is this second bullet on here that says the state law in which, or in the state in which the notary public is licensed and located, must authorize the notary public to engage in such interstate transactions. What does that mean? So here's another wrinkle for us. So I talked about location earlier, and I talked about that scenario where the property was in Texas, the notary was in Texas, everybody's happy. That property is in Texas and you want to use a Florida notary. Well, according to their guidelines, you can do that as long as the state of Florida is okay with the notary in Florida performing transactions for another state and doesn't prohibit that. So that's another thing to look at when you're at the state, you're working in a particular state, is to take a look at your law and see whether or not anybody who becomes a RON notary in your state is allowed to do transactions outside of your state. All right, so now I gave you a little bit of background about what's going on. Now let's talk about practical on the ground, boots on the ground information about what's been going on. So for those of you that have attended RON closings, have seen RON demos and everything, you all know that this is what a RON closing looks like, right? So usually you have two very attractive individuals. They're very well dressed. It's a beautiful day. They've got themselves their mimosas and a baguette, and they're doing this fantastic closing. And this is what all RON transactions look like, and they're fantastic. Well, I will tell you, based upon my experience doing RON transactions, they tend to look a little more like this. So one of the things that I do want to share with everybody is that the RON transaction experience can be wonderful. And we've done a lot of transactions and had some of them that go really well. We have had some of them that are very challenging. We have buyers and sellers that get up and leave the screen and walk outside and yell at their dogs and disappear for a little bit and say, I'm going to go get a beer and I'll be right back. Or in this case, they're eating their muffin and such. So be prepared for when you're thinking about training your staff, you're thinking about training your notary. This is a fantastic service, but at the same time, it's also a window into people's homes. And people tend to behave and act more comfortable at home than they would in your conference room. So you kind of have to be prepared to manage more unique situations that you might come across, if you will. What else have we seen? Well, we've had a couple other challenges. Here's a couple challenges that I will tell you that we run into, which is people attempting to do their closings on their phone. It can be done, certainly. The mobile devices are excellent, have excellent cameras and excellent connections these days, and it's tough to differentiate between somebody on their iPad versus somebody on their phone versus somebody on their phablet. But keep in mind, these are documents with a lot of fine text, a lot of fine print. Not everybody on that call is going to be able to read every document. And so we actively discourage having consumers do transactions on their phones. We suspect that one of the arguments that we will probably be making in court in the future, and we're making it as an industry, is that homeowner saying, I could not read all of the fine print on my 17-page mortgage document on my 3-inch by 4-inch screen that was font size 2.1 with my Coke bottle glasses. So I do encourage you to think about having conversations with the consumers and asking them what type of device they have and are they going to feel comfortable reading documents on it, because on the phone is very challenging. The other one is ID verification. So for any of you who've ever been through knowledge-based authentication, sometimes it's really simple, sometimes it's not so much. Obviously, I've got an example question up here that I made up to be facetious, but we are finding that a number of consumers, now some of them probably should fail KBA, but we are finding a number of consumers who are failing knowledge-based authentication. They are unable to answer the questions that come up. Now, some of them probably should be failing KBA because potentially there's fraud there and we're catching it. But I will tell you that we are getting a lot of false positives or positive falses, or however that should be articulated, in that we have people who it really is them and they really are coming to closing, but the obscurity of the questions that are asked as part of knowledge-based authentication are too difficult for them to answer, and they are not able to get through knowledge-based authentication. And unfortunately, I talked about earlier about how you really want to do that identification and that verification as close as possible, like actually, right when they log into the transaction, because you need to know that it's them. One question I get a lot is, well, can we have them answer the knowledge-based authentication questions a couple days beforehand so that they know if they're going to be able to pass or not? Because if it's the day of closing and they fail, then we got to scramble and get them the documents and such. Well, the problem with that is that if you send them the knowledge-based authentication questions a day or two before, well, it's like an open book test, right? So now they've got the ability to have somebody else come and answer the questions for them. They have the ability to research the answers to the questions. You've got the ability for a fraudster to be able to answer these questions instead of doing it in front of you, just going into the closing. So just be aware that this is a gate. This is, and it has been tripping up some good customers from getting into the process. The second one we find, internet access. These are relatively high definition video. You are transmitting video two ways, and you're screen sharing. For those of you that have been working from home and have been trying to do Zoom calls and team calls and GoToMeeting calls and stuff, you do know that we have internet that goes up and down, and people's home internet, people that tether to their phones and such. So we are finding that internet connectivity is a problem. Now, normally it wouldn't be terrible, but given that we've got a number of the laws written that say that the video has to be continuous and uninterrupted, what that means is that if a consumer drops even for a minute and then reconnects because their internet bounced or they lost connectivity or whatever, you have to scrap that session and start all over again with that customer transaction. You're not able to finish it up because now you've got the video that was not continuous, not uninterrupted, which means not only does it not meet the state regulations, but it's also going to become very difficult going forward to determine whether that video has been altered. So that's definitely one of the areas that we see a lot of challenges. A best practice for sure with all of you when you're looking at this is build into your website or send them to some public sites where you can do a speed test. You can do a connection test of their internet connection they're going to be operating out of, and make sure they've got a strong, reliable internet connection before you recommend RON. And then the last, and it is interesting. We are seeing some of this also. We saw this with regular IDs too, but we are finding that looking at somebody's picture on a driver's license that they held up to a webcam and then comparing it to them on the webcam, as you can see in this picture, is exceedingly difficult and can be quite challenging. In fact, the amusing part about this for all you that I'll share with you is I just randomly, as everybody does, went out to Google and found this lady with the whatever those things on her eyes, and then grabbed a Google image of a sample driver's license, and they happened to be two young blonde ladies. And frankly, looking at these two pictures, I couldn't tell you whether they're the same person or not. I'm guessing that by odds they're not, since they're two random Google pictures, but they could be. So it's another thing to keep a look at. Again, why the knowledge-based authentication is so important, because looking at somebody over a webcam and comparing it to a very small image of a driver's license is not ideal when it comes to confirming they really are who they say they are. And then the last thing that I kind of want to point out, and again, we'll keep it a little light, we'll keep it a little bit of fun, but the other thing that I do find interesting is, I don't know about everybody on the call, but when the stay-at-home orders hit, and we started looking at what was going to be happening around the industry, we discovered that we were under the belief that if we didn't figure out a way to close via RON, if we didn't figure out a way to close via digital, we were going to not be able to close loans. And that was going to have massive ramifications on the industry. Well, I will tell you, about 2 weeks into stay-at-home order here in Texas, I wandered out for the first time, and I put on my mask, I put on my gloves, I had my glasses on, and I went to our local grocery store. And I was standing in line in the grocery store, and I saw behind me a gentleman had a giant can of Colt 44 beer and a jar of peanut butter. And it hit me right then and there that, digital closings are fantastic. RON is great. We're big advocates of it. But you know what? Most people are going to say, hold my beer, I'm going to closings. Because if they're willing to go out to get beer and peanut butter, they're probably willing to go out and do a closing. Closings are, for some people, a once in a lifetime opportunity. For some people, maybe 2 or 3 times in a life opportunity. Most people are going to find a way to come to closing if we do a good job of letting them know that there are safe ways to do it with social distancing. What I really like with RON and what I really like with digital signatures, and I'm seeing this happening around the industry, in our offices, in our competitors' offices, and in our agents, is the various interplay of the different solutions and the different interactions. Maybe sending some documents out to the customer in the morning that they can digitally sign using an e-sign platform. Maybe they're stopping by the office just for a few minutes to sign the notarized documents in the note. Maybe they're doing it all over RON and you're FedExing the note to them. Maybe they're swinging by just to sign the note and they did it over RON. Or Maybe they're using Ron to sign a power of attorney, and then under that POA, somebody is signing those documents for them. So what I really like about what I've seen is, in addition to Ron, we've got very creative as an industry, because we have seen that while the public is looking for safe ways to close, they are still interested in closing their loans. They are still interested in getting in that home. Ron systems in general. So what I want to talk to you all about real fast, sort of here towards the end, and this is my last slide, is really to talk about the fact that when you're looking at choosing a system, if you're out there choosing a system for your office and you say, I want to know which Ron system I should look at, a couple things I would recommend. One, make sure you're getting a system that was designed to be a Ron system. We don't want you to try and cobble together a solution from a bunch of different piece parts. It's the transaction itself, the Ron transaction itself. We need to remember that what we are doing is we are executing the document that's going to convey title from one person to another. It's the document that we're going to insure as an underwriter. It's a document that guarantees that that buyer owns their home, and it's going to include all of their personal data. So this is not something we want to just throw together with baling wire and duct tape. We need to be very respectful of those consumers and understand that the system now could be the deciding factor on whether or not they have clear title or not, or whether or not they have a valid transfer of title. So let's be thoughtful about these systems. The underwriters, I don't know about all of them, most of them are reviewing the systems and are coming out and letting you all know whether or not they will underwrite or they will insure transactions on that system. So make sure you talk to your underwriter to make sure it's a system that they're comfortable with. You need to think about the risk, the demand, and the expense, right? And when I talk about risk, I kind of go back to that. You need to understand that it's never mattered before, right? So it's never mattered as a title agent if I use SoftPro, which of course everybody on this call does, or you use RamQuest or iClose or something like that. The system that you use to run your office was never going to create a claim for you before. It was never going to create an underwriting loss. It was never going to cause a consumer to not actually hold title to their home or for a loan to not be able to be foreclosed on. Well, Ron systems could do that. A poorly designed, a poorly chosen Ron system could have those kinds of ramifications. That's a different way for us to think about the system, and we need to be thoughtful about it, which is why I say research before you spend, research before you sign up with one of them. Make sure you're making the best decision possible. And then kind of the last piece is, this is my last slide. I know I said the last one was the last slide, but I lied. This is the actual last slide. What I really like that we're seeing going on is there's a bunch of pieces to larger puzzles of digital closings. Remote online notarization is now really filled out that slot. We're getting good at it. We've got systems. The industry's coming along. Consumer technology is coming a long ways. One of the things I want to point out is, I will tell you, when I started working from home, one of the first things I said was, well, I don't want to use the video camera that's in my laptop. I want to buy a nice one that I can mount up and hang on the top of my monitor and such like you see. So I'm going to go out on Amazon and buy a Logitech monitor and whatnot. Well, they were completely sold out. They're sold out for weeks, backlog. How many more homes in America now have high-speed internet access? How many more homes in America now have a webcam on their desk as a result of everybody working from home? The consumer technology as a result of COVID has gone up. Remote online notarization sophistication has gone up. The county recorders went under a lot of pressure. That went up. The investor approval, I told you what happened with Fannie and Freddie and their announcement, that went up. The adoption of e-notes, there are 3 times as many people doing e-notes according to the MERS site as there were last year. We're seeing almost double the e-note volume from this time last year. So the nice thing is when you look at all the pieces of the digital transaction, COVID has really accelerated all of them. So that is the end of my presentation. I appreciate everybody listening. I'm going to open it up for any questions, or Leslie, I know you might have a couple yourself, but I thought I would wrap it up there and leave about 10 minutes for follow-up and questions.
Great. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. You have a way with words in explaining something that's a little bit foreign to a lot of us, so appreciate that. We definitely got some questions. The first one that a lot of people want to know is when they are utilizing a third-party platform, a RON platform, who does the notary? Or do they want to know, do you use the notary with that platform that you're using or notary service, or can your settlement agents who normally are notarize documents perform those notarizations on a RON themselves?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is it depends. So there's really two models that you can look at operating with as an agent when it comes to doing this. You can say, I want to license the system from somebody. And then within that license, that system, I'm going to choose to set up one of my staff members as a notary, and I'm going to do the transactions myself. Or maybe I have some preferred notaries that I use that would come into my offices at the end of the month or would help me out with mobile closings. I want to set them up on the system that I'm licensed and do it that way. That's absolutely an option. Several of the RON providers will allow you to do that. A number of the RON providers also have an additional service where they say, we will also do the RON transaction for you. In other words, it's sort of like the idea of saying, I'm going to outsource the closing to a mobile notary company, and that mobile notary company is going to assign one of their notaries to the transaction. Both are very viable options. The two things to think about when you're looking at deciding what to do with those models is, number one, do you think you're going to have enough demand? Do you think you're going to have enough volume so that somebody in your operation could do a number of them and get good at it? Because it is a sophisticated closing and it is different. So when you're trying for the first time, or you're maybe doing your first couple transactions, it might make sense to engage one of the providers and use their notaries that are experts so that customer gets the best possible experience. I can tell you a lot of agents do them themselves. We have operations that do them themselves, and they're very, very good at it once they've done a few of them. So I would look at volume. If it's something you want to offer, but you don't have a lot of volume, maybe outsourcing is a good idea. If you think you're going to do a lot of them, then set up your own staff to do it and run it yourself. Both are options. The important thing to keep in mind, if you do outsource it to somebody out there and you use their notaries, make sure they have notaries that are in the state that you're in, or that in a state where your underwriter allows sort of RON reciprocity, because not all of the RON providers who offer their notaries up have notaries in every state. So it's an important question to ask.
Okay, great. I mean, kind of along those same lines, somebody was asking if you do use the notaries through your notary service provider for the RON provider, is it okay if they maintain the audio visual, or is that sufficient, or does the settlement agent still need to maintain it if they're not doing the notarization?
That's a great question. So by law, the settlement agent does not need to keep the video if they are not doing the notarization. It can stay with the platform. You should ask your underwriter what their position is to make sure that the underwriter doesn't require that the agent also have a copy themselves. Now, that being said, if your underwriter does come back and say, yes, no, you have to have it, that doesn't mean you can't outsource the storage of it back with that original provider. Really what the underwriter, and I'm speaking for Fidelity because we do have a similar requirement on our side, what we're looking for is, if there's a claim, can we come back to you, Mr. Agent, and say, we'd like the video, please, so we can see what happens. So as long as you have it or have contracted with somebody to hold it for you, you should be okay.
Okay. Not surprised we got this one, but we have some questions regarding foreign sellers, and I know you've answered this question on other webinars, but if you could just quickly talk about, that it is actually possible, especially with KBAs, and if they have credit or a TIN or something like that, but just kind of a real quick high-level view if you can do a RON closing with a foreign seller.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a little bit nuanced. So you have to have in every state except Virginia that has a RON law, you have to go through KBA. In order to use KBA, you do need a tax ID number, you need a social security number. So you have to have at least a little credit history in the US. Some foreign sellers do, a lot don't, or foreign buyers do or don't. So if they don't, generally you're not able to do RON with them because they can't get through KBA. Now, I'm going to tell you that from Fidelity's position, that's the way we look at it. If a foreign seller doesn't have enough credit to do KBA, we won't insure a transaction with them. That being said, just for purposes of educating everybody, Virginia law does not require any knowledge-based authentication at all, which is why everybody hates using notaries out of Virginia, because it is a very poorly written law. There are some underwriters and there are some folks out there in the industry that'll say, I can do a foreign seller because I'll do it with somebody in Virginia and I won't require a KBA. That's a discussion between you and your underwriter, but you're basically going to be doing a transaction with a foreign party without being able to identify they really are who they say they are. And that's a risk decision that you and your underwriter have to kind of take on.
Okay, yep, makes sense. So, we talked a lot about Ron, and I think you're correct that we're going to see an influx of states that end up adopting this maybe sooner than they would have had there not been COVID-19. And some of the temporary orders may become permanent as they go through the proper legislation. But wondering your thoughts on RIN. I mean, RIN is a lot less. I guess not less of a gamble, right? And so just wondering your thoughts on some of the states that did emergency RIN and, orders and are allowing it now, and what your thoughts are this post our COVID environment, if you think RIN is something that we can expect to kind of stick around. And again, everybody just know this is, I'm just asking his personal opinion on this. So this is not, set in stone. I just curious because, I feel like that's kind of a, you got your sit at the table and ink sign closings, and then you have Ron, and I feel like a kind of meet in the middle is RIN, right? And so
Yep.
I'm just curious to see what your thoughts are, if you think that's something that might stick around.
Well, if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have told you, no, 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 not at all. They're all going to go away with temporary orders. But we did see the state of New York last week. They are starting to draft a permanent um, legislation of RIN for New York. I know what's going to make it. There are factions in the industry fighting it, and there are factions in the industry supporting it. But that is sort of the first move we've seen to make that permanent. So, as usual, I'm wrong, but I think the challenge that we're going to have is all underwriters that I'm aware of have all been pretty vocal that it's not ideal, and that they kind of ensure them sort of holding their nose, and it's because during COVID, but that we don't really think that that's a long-term good solution for us. So I don't know. We'll see. I know lenders really don't like them. So I think even if we get them passed, it may be very difficult to get any adoption of them too.
Yeah, I agree. I was just wondering because I kind of thought the same thing, and also thinking that so many states at this point have gone so much further into Ron than they had in the past that they might, there's no real benefit for them to spend the time trying to legislate and monitor RIN and just go directly to Ron, but I guess we'll see, right? So
Yep.
I do have one RIN question, and then I promise I'll let you go. Somebody had asked, does the signer have one date and the notary another date? And I'm pretty sure I actually know the answer to that question, but I don't want to answer without making sure it is correct. And so I'm going to let you answer it. My understanding is the signer signs their dates and the notary signs this date that when they get the forms that they actually witness the notarization, but I could be completely wrong on that. So I wanted you to chime in.
So you're talking about on a RIN deal where they're kind of
Yeah.
shipping the actual documents itself. Yeah,
Yes.
as I don't know that I've ever seen like the official thing on this. Like, like I'm not sure there's like the notary gods that did this for sure because nobody contemplated RIN. The guidance that we generally see out there is that you sign it the date you witnessed it. So if I saw you do it on Thursday and the docs are shipped to me Friday, then I sign it as of Thursday because that's when I witnessed it.
Okay, that's pretty much what I've seen, but
Yeah.
I've never actually seen anything in writing on that either. Just kind of like rule of thumb is that's when you actually witnessed it. So when you get those actual physical documents, that's what you're signing. So,
Yeah. And
okay,
yep,
so
exactly
yeah, go
right.
ahead.
Nope. I'm done. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I cannot thank you enough. You explained it really well. I'm sure we might have a few follow-up questions, in which case I might reach out. We will be sending a link, like I mentioned, to the recording and all the Q&A. We will include the slide deck. We had several people ask for that information. I don't want to keep everybody. Obviously, the slide deck will also include some recipes that we have in here. I don't know, Jason, if you know this about me, but I may pretend want to be chef. So every week we highlight different recipes that we make. I cook a lot. I cook even more now that I'm home all the time. Jason is kind of a road warrior like myself. This is past 12 weeks has been very new to both of us being home and working from home all the time. So If anyone has any questions, I know a lot of you emailed me last week about trying the recipes. I love hearing that what you liked, what you made, what you didn't like. But this is a new family favorite and it's super easy. But I'll let you guys read through that. But most importantly, this skinny fizz margarita, I highly recommend. And I highly recommend it if you like some spice because it has some jalapeno in it and you can control your heat. So, feel free to try it and let me know. And I really, I'm sorry, I'm laughing because somebody just sent me, wow, that is an exciting recipe. Can't wait to try. So, again, I hope everyone's doing good. I hope everyone stays safe. Jason, thank you again. And hopefully I'll see you guys in person. Jason, see you in person sometime soon.
Yeah,
And we will be sending this out. And just thank you to everybody, as usual, for joining us. And we will talk to you next Tuesday. Thank you.
sounds good. Look forward to seeing Raleigh sometime soon.
Great. All right. See you
Thanks.
later. Bye,
Bye now.
everybody.